Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We are a fast-growing international community of people in and connected to the financial services industry that want it to behave in a more transparent, truthful, and trustworthy way. We are working together collaboratively to build a framework for finance reform. The idea of our framework for finance reform is to focus on the 12 most important topics that we believe have the potential to help drive change within the financial services sector. Those 12 topics cover issues such as incentives and transparency and governance. And arguably, one of the most important is leadership. And with the intention of focusing on the importance of leadership, we are carrying out on a very selective basis interviews with key people within the financial services sector who we believe have got something relevant and worthwhile and frankly meaningful to say about the importance of leadership within the financial services sector. We're therefore very excited today to be interviewing somebody who has built a wonderful track record over many years for exactly the kind of leadership that we want to help to highlight and showcase. I'm joined today by my colleague Debbie Henderson, who's going to be responsible for conducting the interview, and I'll pass over to Debbie now to introduce herself. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Andy. And it's a privilege to be here and to be supporting your mission, which I know you've been holding close to your heart with total dedication for a good many years now, and all that you've created by way of the Transparency Task Force. This is a Canadian accent. I am a former investment banker of 16 years, both corporate finance and institutional equity sales in New York and London. And I had some 22 years ago an epiphany of making a decision that I would change careers and focus on the people side. I realized that leadership was driving a lot of my decisions of recommendations of investments, and I wanted to support leaders to become all they could become, and particularly to learn how to help them create healthy cultures. And that's been my fascination, my passion for the past 22 years. I'm delighted, and I'd say most of the work has been with leaders in financial services. So I'm particularly delighted to be speaking today with Tom Baigrie, who is the CEO of LifeSearch. And we could call LifeSearch the UK's most awarded life insurance company, if I'm not mistaken. Tom, maybe you can help correct us on that. And in fact, LifeSearch was founded by Tom, who is the CEO, of 22 years ago, and he will share hopefully a little bit of the history of how he founded the company. Today, the company has insured over 650,000 people in the UK, has a Trustpilot rating of 4.9 out of 5, and was ranked 3rd in the Sunday Times top 100 companies for its culture in the mid-size category in 2019. Tom was brought up in South Africa. You'll hear a little bit of the accent there. He came to the UK when he was 20. Tom, what else might you wish to share to the intro that I just made? Welcome. Thank you for taking the time. And I will leave it to you to guide us a little bit on the background that got you to creating and founding LifeSearch. What you even love about your role right now, as I'm understanding there's some interesting elements of expansion that you're looking at too. And I guess from that, even if you'd weave in what your vision for LifeSearch is. Thank you.
Gosh, that's a big old order there, Debbie. But I think we best start at the beginning, seeing you mentioned it. Without doubt, when one talks in the modern context of the word privilege, I must be in really a tiny category of the most privileged people, but I mean that in the negative context, in that I'm a product of apartheid South Africa, and as you can see, my color make me a beneficiary of that system, albeit one too young to bear guilt for what went on around me, not for 1 second young enough to not feel guilt. So a part of the way I've always run businesses, without doubt, is the way I was raised. A traditional Catholic family, though I've kind of lost my taste for religion rather, but perhaps not the original tenets of most religions, which are normally beautiful things when interpreted correctly. And then the escape as soon as I was able from that terrifying and revolting regime, which I had enjoyed a lovely first 15 or 16 years of childhood, under, or perhaps on top of, I don't know. So I don't want to major on that too bit, but it meant that when I came to London, age 20, I wasn't, I was just an economic migrant, I think you'd have to call me. I was a legal one, but I also had a deep underlying desire to just do things right, having been raised in a world in which they were done wrong. So that perhaps got me started off, but I couldn't get a job when I came here age 20. I hadn't gone to university. I had been conscripted into the army for 2 years, and that experience really was enough for me. So I came here and applied to go to university, but then realized I'd have to pay my own fees. While my father was a successful surgeon, he couldn't pay British university fees. That was beyond the family. So I never got that. So I went looking for jobs, and the only job I could get was as a self-employed insurance salesman. No one wanted to actually pay me a salary. So I started doing that. And in what is a sort of a classic immigrant story, LifeSearch now is the largest as well as the most awarded protection advisor, or protection intermediary if you want, in the UK. Yeah, we protect, we don't call what we do selling insurance, we call it protecting families. We protect more families really than any other insurance advisor or broker. And that's not to make us a life insurance company. We are an intermediary. So we deal with the whole of the UK market, all the insurers in the UK market. That itself is a point of ethical concern. It's a very difficult thing to do that, manage all those different suppliers and their different systems and ways of dealing with things. And we might not last in that forever, but for now we hold the line that you can't help every customer to the best of your ability unless you deal with every insurer. So yeah, that's who we are, and that's what I've built since 1981 when I arrived to Kip and my sister's spare room down in East Sheen in London. And the first manifestation was as an insurance agent for an insurance company, albeit self-employed, which in those days actually meant you were as much an investment salesperson as you were an insurance salesperson. And I turned that into a reasonably successful career, sort of connected to that institution, and then broke away when they were taken over by a man who I thought I knew vaguely of, but knew him in my mind to be a complete crook. He was so successful at it, he bought an insurance company, which I was sort of attached to. So I left and set up on my own with a couple of colleagues who felt the same way. And that eventually turned into a wealth management business, which did a lot of insurance as well, life insurance, I should say, and disability insurance, not general insurance. I've never been in the motor market or many of those markets. That turned into that over the years. And then in 1998, I set up alongside it this business, LifeSearch, to focus on a mass market solution for protection. Scroll forward to 2016, and we sold the wealth management business. Baigrie Davies, my partner Arthur Davies, and I, and our colleague Ian Howe, sold Baigrie Davies to Standard Life, so that all of us could move on with our lives into different plans. In my case, to run LifeSearch full time. I could pause there, Debbie, or I could rattle on through the how you become an ethical financial advisor, and then take that on into an ethical life insurance brokerage. Shall I charge on?
Yes, I would be really interested because it sounds as if you had the opportunity, you could have just retired yourself then but something I take it is actually driving you to continue in this business in Life Search. And I love the fact that you corrected the language that is used around protection. And I sense you've actually chosen to use different words in the manner in which Life Search is run from the internal perspective, and we can get there. So do tell us why the continuation with Life Search. What's the passion for you there?
Let me get there, Debbie. But let me, having allowed you to reset me now presumptuously, I'll say, but hang on a second before we go down the path you've chosen. There was a bit that I thought I should add, and forgive me, this is not good being interviewed technique. But I wanted to make the point that when I was 20 and I was a self-employed salesman and living on my in my sister's spare room, she took me aside one morning after a few months and said, "Tom, all you're talking about is money. You can't just do stuff for money. You've got to make sure that you're doing good by these customers you're selling things to. Are your products good, or are you just ripping them off?" And I assured her my products were very good. I truly believed them to be, and for their day, they certainly were. But so I was able to assure her that. But that was a little, what's the word, jolt into the conscience of well, just a 20-year-old ambitious guy trying to make a crack of a different country with no connections or friends, and hitting the phones and doing that stuff that you do. So that was a seminal moment, actually, when yeah, I realized that, thanks to my saintly sister, who's just retired now after X years. She wouldn't thank me for telling you how many years as a district nurse around London. So that impetus made sure that when I set up as a financial advisor, I was trying always to put the customer first. It is in financial advice, personal financial advice, an obvious thing to do, because your customers are your bread and butter. The more happy customers you are, the more funds under management you keep and grow, and therefore, it's a self-serving good. Whereas in a lot of financial services, good doesn't serve you quite as well as not quite so good. But certainly in personal financial wealth management, if you do right by your customers and they love you, then you do well. Or rather, you do your best. So that was always the mission. And my partner, Arthur Davies, was a man of very similar conscience and ethics and approach to business. So we built that model throughout the late 80s and 90s when we were together, in a world in which, I remember quite clearly going to a conference, and one of our great banks, still a great bank in the UK, the manager stood up and told me how they were going to utterly dominate the personal investment and wealth market with the incredible number of endowment policies their branch managers were selling, and how he'd hosted a conference in Birmingham with thousands of branch managers there, all roaring to the sea. And I was listening to all of this guy, almost holding my head in my hands, going, what a shocking state of affairs. And of course, that then eventually unraveled entirely, and the banks have been paying billions away ever since, really, through the endowment scandal and the PPI scandal. So it was against that background of lots of just devious behavior from large institutions, small institutions, and of course, the crook who had taken over the business I worked for, who eventually was disbarred even from being a director of UK companies, when he was eventually found out. So it was against that background, frankly, of filth in financial services in the UK, that I founded Life Search in 1998. So the idea was quite simple, really, from the off. It was to prove that in a business like insurance broking, which is generally speaking quite a hard-bitten and driven business with the profit and loss to the fore, you could in the long term build a truly great business, which was my ambition, by putting the customer first and profits second. I later inserted people second, profits third into that. And that little litany is not unique. Lots of people say they do that, but that is an underlying ethos that I have tried my damned hardest to stick to all these years. There we are. That was the bit I wanted to say before we moved on to sort of Life Search itself proper. Debbie, and how we started. Well, using language amongst other things to change the way our people thought and think.
Thank you. It's because what I'm really hearing is, yes, gratitude to your sister and to your ears that were willing to hear that voice of conscience that somehow must have come from, I'm guessing, several family lines or whatever, but it landed with you in a sea of what you're describing appears to be a different way of operating at that time from what you were picking up.
Yes, yes. No, hard sell was the rule of the 80s, and it became an institutionalized rule in the 90s, and hence the litany of scandals that we have endured as the regulators try to unpick the hard sell. Of course, regulation itself contains the roots of its own unwinding or its own disaster, which we can touch on in due course, because I see it happening around me now to some extent. But there's no question that the world of personal financial services today in the UK is hugely healthier than it was in the 80s and 90s. And that is because regulation has weeded out not the worst abuses, but the worst abuses of scale. The regulator takes a sort of scale approach. You know, the threat to the system is what they're interested in, rather than the most interested, rather than the individual suffering of people, which they should be as interested in. But clearly, it's difficult when you're an organisation of that scale. So they have improved. Regulation has improved lots of stuff, but the regulator's never really been very interested in pure life insurance broking. It's in pensions and investments that you can do the most harm to customers if you lie and steal. In life insurance, you could sell someone the wrong policy for a bit too much commission, but that's really not the same level of suffering you cause your customer. So the regulator really, our sector is relatively lightweight, which is not to say it doesn't include its fair share of controversy and lots of malpractice, but yeah, I can touch on some of that if you want.
What's interesting is the combination of looking at, here's you that ended up needing to be a lone wolf, it sounds, who could detect the crook and say that doesn't resonate, but could feel and see the whole system going one way, seemingly. And I'm finding it curious as to what had you notice the hard sell and say, that's not the rate we're going to take. Did you ever find yourself in that journey of noticing that this was really tough to keep the integrity line in a world where the hard sell seemed to be happening? Did you find yourself tested a number of times in that, or your people tested?
Gosh, Debbie, just your last phrase, leaving aside your last phrase, my people tested, to me, do you know the honest answer to that is no, not really. From the earliest days, there were products made available to me that would pay a lot more money, but that would be obviously not good enough for customers that I could sell. And I never did. Never knowingly sort of went for the money at the cost of the customer. I always went for the customer at the cost of money. I think that's because my long late mother, if that's the right expression, would have gone absolutely mad and been appalled at my behavior, and you can't really upset your mother. That's not a good thing. So no, just the way I was raised made that frankly not my problem. I could look at it all, I could load it all, I could try and change it all, I could complain to the regulator about it all, or write to the trade press, as I often did, about it all. But it wasn't ever a temptation for me, no. On the other hand, when you run an organization like such as now 500 odd people in the family, as we sometimes say, though it isn't a family business, I always make that absolutely clear. So it's a sort of a business family, and one shouldn't confuse words like that. But 500 of us who are colleagues, and yeah, I know a lot of them face temptation on a daily basis, and a lot of them struggle with it. And there has to be a compliance team to check it out. There has to be a best practice team to ensure that everyone knows what's right and knows right from wrong, and can spot when they themselves are being tempted and therefore do something about it, as opposed to just being blindly ignorant and happy, which an awful lot of wrongdoers are, quite frankly. Not in the firm, you understand, in the wider market. But the absolute key driver of behaviors across a group of people is the culture that the business talks about and manifests, and the way the leaders talk when they're talking to their people, and just their general behaviors, though obviously behavior in a business context really is talk and body language, I suppose. But yeah, there's no charging into action literally. There's just the language one uses, what one says and what one means. So yes, the business Life Search is formed in part to do everything it possibly can to ensure that anyone who is tempted doesn't take up that temptation, but moves on past it and does the right thing by the customer. Which is not to say that happens 100% of the time. We're dispensing thousands and thousands of pieces of advice a week as a business, and some of it will inevitably be wrong, and some of those wrongs inevitably will be intentional. But the complaints rate sits at, last I looked, 0.0013%, which I think is something like 1 in 10,000 or something. I'm not quite sure. Some mathematician can do that better than me. But suffice to say, that's the complaint rate, not the at-fault found wrongdoing rate. That rate is literally 2 or 3 cases over the years that are bad examples of that. So yeah, that's what you can do if it is your focus. And to be fair, the regulator does a hell of a lot to make sure that it is your focus, because if it isn't, you're eventually going to fall foul, and whatever you've built is going to be dismantled. As clearing banks have found with the fines they've had to pay and the costs they've had to pay, running into dozens of billions. I mean, a huge amount of money, even for institutions that big.
How do we gauge a leader? How do we support leaders ultimately, as you, to be leading from conscience rather than leading from regulation? Because that's where I sensed was making the big distinction. Your conscience, as I was picking it up, was driving not only how you show up, how you lead your organization, but on top of that, you were making, and maybe you want to expand on that, clear commentary into the regulators and the industry about what was needed. So you weren't just a lone voice, you were seeking to have impact and be a total stand for your conscience. Would you like to elaborate on your thoughts on that?
Yes, the incentivizing of a leader to lead from conscience rather than in the quest for wealth or some other form of reward is a real challenge. But for me, the secret must be to explain that the P&L is illusory. It's temporary. It's not illusory, it's temporary. It comes and goes. And yeah, if your sole aim is to make money, well, then you've got to do what you've got to do to make money. But it's not that much fun just making money if it doesn't feel good. And so what's the word? The incentive for a striving leader to do it right is because they want to feel good at night, is because they want to be relaxed within themselves. Because when business goes badly or goes wrong, they know that it's not a moral issue. It doesn't have to sit on their conscience. They were trying, even if they got it wrong, even if what happened was wrong, they were trying. They can still feel good about themselves and their efforts. Now, of course, we can all delude ourselves completely on many different things, but it seems to me that there's not enough talked about the pleasure of doing things well, the pleasure of having a happy customer, the sheer joy of a team member saying, "I'm really glad I work for this company. Don't ever want to work for another." my instinct has always been to take those benefits of doing things right and turn them into the P&L for people, to say, you know, imagine what it's like running a business with that normally its competitors suffer very high turnover of staff because of their driven attitude, whereas we don't. We don't have all of that cost and pain and training and failure and restart and failure and restart. You know, we say that's really good for the bottom line. And we can afford a lighter compliance structure and less rigidity because of our cultural strength. So my instinct is always to portray that as a motivator. It's good for the P&L if you do it right and you do it for long enough. You know, my original ambition to prove that an ethical business could do very well, well, we've gone a long way towards it. But at a deeper level, it's just more fun. It really is a lot more fun doing something that you feel is good and that your people feel is good, and that you can talk about honestly and openly as being something good, than it is to constantly talk about how much money you've made. That is, in the end, quite a tight loop. And you know, when I was, as I said, when I was in my 20s, for a while, it really was everything. I just needed money desperately. Didn't have much. But yeah, that's for people in their 20s. Once you've that sounds very flippant of me. Sorry. That may be an early entrepreneurial feature, but it shouldn't last very long. It really shouldn't. Not if you're going to make yourself happy, because money makes things easier. It doesn't make them happier. Did I answer that one, Debbie, or do you?
Yeah, no, you have. You've given a beautiful example of what I'll call attending to sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Literally on the basic level where we need to pay the bills, we can be looking at the money element, but somewhere we don't have to lose the conscience just because we're seeking to pay the bills. You manage, despite industry hoo-ha or industry competitiveness, to hold the compass steady on the sense that it wasn't just conscience, rah, but I'm hearing conscience and reinforcing pleasure, feel-good factor for everybody, for you, the organization, for customers ultimately, and for your stand in the marketplace, because it just keeps fueling around. I'm curious, when you started taking the stand in the outside marketplace, did you feel that there were people who would say, Tom, let us learn from you. How have you done this? How do you do this? Were you giving lessons to others? Were you able, did the regulators listen to and observe how you were doing it, come to the door to want to find out, so we could create a feel-good financial sector based on doing what's right by everybody?
Yes and no. When you start, what's the word, preaching, and I use a scornful word intentionally there, because that's what my biggest detractors might have called it. Initially, you know, I'm going to misquote a wonderful phrase, but initially they ignore you, and then they laugh at you, and then they dismiss you, and then they do what you say. I can't remember who said a better version of that originally. The regulator has listened from time to time, though it would be vastly presumptuous of me to claim any particular impact there. And yes, I am now credited sometimes in the trade press and by other commentators as having led the industry into a better place than it was over these last 22 years. So that does feel good when I hear that, or win some prize for doing that. But that's not really the purpose of it at all. The purpose of it is just an inner need to expand the good one can do oneself by creating a company that does it, and then by using that corporate profile to try and get an industry to do it. And the protection advisory industry is now, so much better than it was when I started. I mean, there's no comparison at all. And that's largely due to the rise of the specialist protection intermediary who has got enough specialism to become expert rather than just doing it as a sideline sometimes when a customer asks for it, which was the traditional way. And yeah, I'm one of the original specialists in protection. and indeed the only one still trading, I think, from those very early days in the late 90s to today within the same kind of organization or within the same business. So yeah, have I had an influence on the market? Certainly, absolutely. I've influenced the protection market greatly. Have I influenced the regulator? Not as much as I would have liked. Not as much as I would have liked. I tried really hard, very actively, and was listened to by them during the retail distribution review, which has served to improve the quality of advice hugely in the UK, but utterly diminish its scope in that only wealthy people, or rather that financial advisors or wealth managers or financial planners, such as what I regard as the best of that breed, they really can only afford, due to the costs of regulation and the way they're remunerated, to deal with rich people. So if you're sort of not got accumulated wealth, very hard to get financial advice. You tend to be in a world of salespeople and websites, which is not great, not the right way to go about it. But that was the predicted effect of RDR, and it has come to pass. But at the same time, its abolition of commission in the investment and pensions world has massively reduced the routine ripping off of customers for more of that commission. So yeah, I try to ameliorate the effects and keep it out of protection, because in protection, commission works. It's the right way. In general insurance, it's the right way of doing things. Even though it's a dirty word, in truth, what happens is that all your costs are right at the front end of when you arrange an insurance policy as a broker, and therefore your fees need to be charged then. And any market survey, any consumer survey will tell you that consumers are not prepared to pay fees for general insurance. I mean, if your motor broker charged you a fee as opposed to just a premium, that's suddenly two different costs you've got to juggle. Whereas in general insurance with no investment aspect, you've just got one cost. You've got the premium and the benefit, an easy consumer comparison to do, and that's why it works in that market. So I managed to influence the regulator to stay out of protection, or to not read across from investments and pensions into protection. I was part of a group of people that did that. And that's one of the reasons why the protection market has strengthened over time and broadened its reach. And so that more people in the UK are now getting properly protected, their families and themselves against disability each year. So yeah, telling people what to do it works. But eventually, and despite endless frustrations, you can look back after 22 years and go, yeah, all right, well, it seems to look a lot closer to what I wanted it to look like than it used to. So maybe I have a part in that. On the other hand, Debbie, the problem with regulation is that inevitably it gives a business leader a rule book. So it supplies your conscience for you. And I'm no expert, but I've read enough to believe that the root cause of the 2008 financial crisis was regulation. It was the SEC's heavier regulation of the banks than the life insurance companies that allowed the life insurance companies to see that there was a market they could access that their banking competitors couldn't, that market being subprime mortgages. So one insurer, I won't bother mentioning its name, got the hang of it and got huge at it. And suddenly all the insurance companies were at it. And suddenly the subprime market was vast, and therein lay the roots of disaster. So it was the SEC that provided the initial impetus through regulation to that evil. And I see it in my market now, where the regulator has defined two ways of being helped to buy insurance, one of which is advice, which is what we do, which is difficult to deliver, expensive to deliver, and comes with a huge regulatory burden in terms of making absolutely sure that what you say is right to the customer, versus guidance, which carries no regulatory burden, but in which you can persuade customers while denying that's what you do. And suddenly I'm looking at this market going, goodness me, if I was setting up in business again, in order to be as successful as I could be, I think I'd set up a guidance business, not an advice business. Because the regulatory burden on advice is now so great that because this new alternative exists, yeah, that's where the clever boys are and girls are going and setting up their businesses, because they can effectively give advice without facing the regulatory consequences. That is precisely where the regulator, it shows how the regulator can cause consumer detriment by, if you like, overtaxing those who seek to do it right, and allowing chinks in for those who basically want to avoid that burden.
I think there's a lot we could carry on discussing here, and I think you pointed to a really key piece, which I will call, in every human being, not only is there the conscience, there's also the creative capacities. And if we block the human capacity to be able to be all it can be, the challenge is we will seek to find a creative means to be able to bypass the blockages, which is, I think, what you're speaking to. I'd love to hear a little more by going inside LifeSearch now, how you, in creating the culture, would say, in our few minutes we've got left, how you, what were some of the key takeaways that you might leave our audience around how you led internally to have this be the feel-good, fun place that everybody wanted to stay in and wanted to carry on working in? There must be some key takeaways on leadership that you could leave us with.
Yes, I think there are, in that when I was first recruiting people to give advice, and if you like, not doing it myself anymore, but recruiting and training up people to do it, I realized that I needed to get hold of them really early on in the process, and as well as the technicalities and how to do the job and all the other bits of coaching and training one gives a new team member. Though back in the early days it was a bit scanty, I'm afraid, but the thing I needed to get them to understand was that they actually had an opportunity to do good, and they should take that. And I developed a 20-minute talk that to this day I give to every life searcher, no matter what their role is or what stage of their career they join us. And I won't give it all to you now, but I will simply say that I take the pretty obvious request that they be honest with our customers, to which everyone agreed. And I set that against a background of asking them whether what we do is good for our customers. And because we protect families, because we organize the sending of considerable sums of money to people at what might conceivably be the worst moment of their life, or one of the very worst moments of their life when they need it most, that is self-evidently a good thing to be involved with. And then I point out that if they agree that, then to do good, something that you think is good, but do it badly, makes you doubly worse. I typically use the phrase that a bent copper is worse than the thief. That gets the message through to them that if you're going to do good, you do it well. That's the trick with doing good. If you do good badly, no, you're abusing a privilege. I then turn that into honesty, which is obvious, but then I explain to them that what we're really asking people to do when we're asking them to be honest with customers is we're asking them to take personal responsibility for the outcomes they're causing. And within personal, honesty lies as a province, as a part of personal responsibility. It's when you seek to do good and take personal responsibility for that achievement that you force yourself to be honest, that you force yourself to tell the truth. That's how you do it. But in a corporate context, of course, taking personal responsibility can be very dangerous. You can end up exaggerating a mistake, because if you've ever taken personal responsibility, you know that it's there that you do your best work and your worst when you cock it up. You leave yourself horribly exposed. And so we reassure them that we will treat them fairly if they expose themselves to that. And I contract with each new joiner that if their error, no matter how grievous, is caused by the taking of personal responsibility, they will not face punishment for that. They will face understanding. And I then take that forward and suggest to them that the thing that does in a corporate context is it breeds an atmosphere of tolerance. And of course, tolerance is the absolute prerequisite of honesty. And I say that if you've ever been in an intolerant environment, and we all have because we were all at school, you'll know that it just breeds lies. Absolutely. And there are intolerant regimes and intolerant people, and one automatically lies around them because there's no point in taking the pain that comes with truth. So honesty, personal responsibility, the corporate humility to accept errors made out of personal responsibility, create an atmosphere of tolerance, which in turn creates honesty. That virtuous circle, with the injection of the word humility in there, is the key, I think, to delivering long-term corporate honesty to customers, and therefore continuing to do good. So that's the trick I would say that LifeSearch operates on. We formalized, that was in 2001 or two. I got to that point and put all that down and formulated a way of describing it that new joiners, whatever age and stage, could understand and feel involved in. And then in 2007, we established our purpose as a business, long before Simon Sinek wrote his magnificent book, Why, which took all that. We were a bit ahead of that curve. I read a Harvard business paper back in the noughties and decided that this was a good idea. And then the development of our culture and values was effectively to institutionalize this instinct of mine, which was shaping the business, but as we got bigger, needed to become more influential daily across the business. And so a colleague injected the concept of values run business into the approach, and we worked from there to get our 5 values instilled, and they remain to this day, because I don't think one need change one's values. They are what they are.
Well, it was lovely to hear you say values don't really change, because it was one of the questions I had, having read your 5 values: care, tolerance, honesty, excellence, and openness, if I'm not mistaken. And I've heard you now describe tolerance and honesty to get us there. And I'm curious, you wish to just amplify a little bit more on the values and how you keep them alive. This is, as Andy said, rich for so many people to be able to listen to. Thank you.
No, very good. And I should apologize for having to move location in the middle. A technician came into the room I was in, so I've managed to move rooms while you were asking your question. Those 5 values were chosen by, I think then, 300 or 400 people in the business in a co-creation exercise that went on for quite a while, quite a few months. We worked hard to distill the process. There is a process companies go through that does this, and we followed that kind of process pretty well, or very well, in fact. But the 5 values, they were what they were. They were the most popular. They were the ones that resonated across the company. They won the votes. I wanted the word humility injected into there. I didn't get my way. The board, wanted the 5 that were most popular across the company. So I went, fine. That's how it works. These are therefore very real values to the people within LifeSearch. And that doesn't make them a bit odd, or rather that doesn't stop them being a bit odd, because while excellence is obviously a business virtue and any company could have it, and honesty likewise, you've only got 4 or 5 words in this exercise. Generally, that's what you end up with. And to make one of them openness when you've already got honesty is somewhat tautologous. And then to put in care and tolerance likewise, you're essentially repeating yourself a bit. But it dawned on me that what actually we had done subconsciously, because it certainly wasn't intentional, was that we had talked to the internal behaviors, the internal values, and how they express themselves externally. So that in selecting tolerance internally, we were enabling care of the customer. Because you can't care for the customer unless you come from a world of tolerance. It works inside to work outside. And likewise, openness within an organization is very rare. Organizations tend to keep their secrets. So we built an open organization where the board minutes are published as soon as possible after the board meeting. Directors' reports are available to read if you want to read them in a way that normally only a board would see. And yes, we redact personal information that's being described to the board, or commercial confidentialities of our business partners and so on, but literally the redactions are sub 5% of all that the board cogitates on is redacted from those in the company who want to see it. And that's a very unusual thing to do. And so it's the openness within that we have taken to heart as a value and encouraged that delivers the honesty out. So they're a peculiar set of values and they work for us, but why change them? Oh, we could put lots of other words in there, but they just seem right. And if you keep shaping your business to them and you keep talking about them over and over, and you make sure that whatever context you're talking in, a business triumph, the winning of a new partner, a great set of results, a really bad month, a shocking piece of something or other in the industry, or perhaps internally, or you know, whatever it may be, you refer back to those values either as having been breached or as more likely having been exemplified, and you ascribe as best you can your triumphs to your values. Everyone in the business gets it. They really get it. And the more you repeat it, the more it happens and works. Works for the people in the business. So yeah, values is just a question of actually believing it yourself as a leader, making sure that all your leaders believe it too, get it, understand why it is, and then just making sure as best you can that that's communicated, that is the way they talk and lead as best you can without being too prescriptive and certainly not micromanaging.
How beautiful. What I'm really hearing is that you have totally taken to heart and embodied in these values the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's not just conscience that's running the organization, it's conscience with heart, with care, and you can feel it in your body if it's out of alignment. And if you're constantly speaking about it, it keeps alive in the organization. And I would guess that life searchers, I'm not going to say employees, when going home, will feel proud of the organization that they're working for because they feel safe inside. If there were a mistake made, that they can be open about it, that there will be care and tolerance in the inside so they can be of service in the outside and service within their own families and communities thereafter. So the ripple effect you're creating by all of this attention and intention you have around values feels profound.
It works. It works. It worked particularly well and obviously during lockdown, where the notion of care meant that we just got everybody working from home without any well, in fact, it worked so well because the notion of care had represented itself in an absolute acceptance of flexible working practice going back to about 2005. So we had always enabled those who needed to work from home and effectively work more or less the hours that they best wanted to. Not quite that beautiful, but almost. And that led to software and hardware purchases over the years and system selections which enabled flexible working and enabled home working. So it was easy for us. We just deployed those systems across everybody overnight, and everybody went home and worked. And then again, the same application of the same value had led us to create an internal intranet system, which was there precisely to communicate the values and also to ensure that our behaviors every day were talked about in terms of the values. So even if it's simple, thanks Susie for staying late to help that customer when I had to go, and doing all of that, hashtag care or hashtag excellence. And so that sort of internal Facebook feed became a key driver of our sort of internal communication structure. And the end result is that it was just easy for us to deal with that. We had a method of communication, we had people enabled to work from home, and everybody could just get on with it. And also those who struggled, those who suffered, single parents with kids working from, kids at home working from home. Again, that's just tolerance. I think large numbers of businesses have started to exhibit tolerance, have understood they've had to and so on, but for us it was second nature. So it didn't really, it had minimal impact, and our people have come through with Oh, quite a few, but relatively few cases of mental health issues and personal difficulties of that sort. So yeah, it does transform organization, but you do have to go for it. You do have to keep on at it. You can't stick it up on a wall and hope it's going to change things for more than a week, because it won't. It's got to become the passion of the leadership to hold true to this North Star of values. And yeah, talk about it enough, convince people enough, and they'll get it and they'll start doing it, and eventually, the whole company does it. It matters too what language you used. You've picked up a little on our language. We changed our human resources department to people and culture because we figured that was what it was about. Human resources is kind of 1950s word. It just doesn't apply. I hate the word staff. I think colleges have to have staff, do they? And armies have to have staff officers. I don't know, but it's really not any kind of a word for a team of people who you want to collaborate and work together. Those are colleagues. That's what they are. And employees, well, no, quite a few of our people are self-employed. That's just a simple tax status. That's got nothing to do with actually, again, collegiate working together. So yeah, so use the language that means something to you, or that you want people to understand your meaning through, rather than using language that other people use. I hate the word manager. I don't want managers in my business. I want leaders. They are slightly different things, but I'd far rather someone who's an excellent leader than a good manager. So get the organization to think that way by using the right language. And values are just language at one level, but also they eventually are absolutely behaviors. And combination, language and behavior, that's how you get this thing right. Touch wood anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just, I would love to be able to continue this conversation because there's many other angles we could take. I know that Andy is going to speak to you about, in a moment, about his plan for the TTF, and where we're actually looking at taking your value, if you like, of collaboration and what might be possible with other role model leaders in financial services. A key takeaway I'm getting from this is your mission may have started out by the little voice in your head from your mother or from your sister, call it the feminine side, but you've brought and embodied both elements in an often very masculine dominated world called financial services, and brought a beautiful combination of creating safety, nurturement inside the organization to deliver what's needed on the outside. And I say, congratulations, chapeau. It's been a delight to speak with you and to hear how it's done. I'm going to pass over to Andy.
Thank you, Debbie. That's very, very kind of you.
Well, thank you, Debbie. And also, of course, thank you, Tom. That has been an absolute privilege to listen to. It really has. It's been fantastic to hear somebody so tuned into doing the right thing, but not only wanting to do the right thing by himself, but also to encourage all the people around him, including the regulators, to do the right thing as well. And I've been in the business a long, long time, Tom, and your name has always been associated with a better way of doing things, a quality way of doing things. Listening to this conversation has made it so easy for me to understand exactly why you and your organization have been able to build an absolutely first-class reputation as a place to work, as an exemplar of conduct and behavior in the industry. And very simply, the financial services industry needs more people to lead with exactly the kind of qualities, aspirations, values, and outlook that you have, Tom. It's been fantastic. We within the Transparency Task Force we're never short of ideas. We're short of all sorts of other things, but we're never short of ideas. And one of the ideas we're getting particularly excited about is an idea I'd love to have your initial thoughts on. Well, we're going to be creating, Tom, the International League of Ethical Leaders in Financial Services. And allow me to elaborate on the purpose of the International League of Ethical Leaders in Financial Services. We think that for every leader in financial services who has your kind of mindset, there are many, many others that don't. Now, amongst those that don't, there'll be those that will never ever want to behave or think the way that you do. It's just not the way that they are. They're just not wired up like that. But we also believe there's a certain type of leader who actually, given the choice and shown how, would want to behave in the very, frankly, enlightened way in which you operate. So one of the ideas of having this International League of Ethical Leaders in Financial Services is to create a community of good, honest, mission-led, purposeful leaders in financial services who authentically relate to the idea that there's an opportunity for them to influence the leadership within financial services quite literally around the world. We have a wonderful global community. We really are very much at the early stage of this. We're at the drawing board stage of it. But the leaders we've spoken to so far seem to be seeing this as an opportunity to give back in a way that really suits them, a chance to talk about what matters to them, hopefully in a manner that's quite inspiring and even motivating for others. So I'm not going to ask you whether you'd like to be involved with that. That's a conversation we can have later. But what I would like, please, is your initial thoughts about the idea of doing something collaboratively to build a network around the world of honest, ethical leaders who've got an appetite in some way to give back. What would your initial, off the top of your head, thoughts be about that idea?
Well, it's a wonderful idea, Andy. Your ideas always are, and yeah, give it whole backing. Terrifying in its scope, in that how on earth do you manage that on a global scale, and also how do you deal with the cultural differences? And I'm thinking more actually the culture of financial services regulation. When I look at other markets, not as long or as tightly regulated as the UK, I often see behaviours that I think just wouldn't be allowed in our market for a minute. They'd lead to prosecutions immediately. But in those markets, they're deemed entirely above board and acceptable. Or rather, they seem to be to an outsider who's not actually studying the detail of the market, but they're certainly ongoing at large scale. So, yeah, challenges both in financial services cultural senses, but also in you found me and you've taken me and perhaps you've investigated me and now you trust me. But how many times do we do that before we find someone who actually pulls the wool over our eyes and really is the con man that you and I could both be if we wanted to be, given our communication skills, and therefore be exposed as charlatans. But that is an inevitable risk when you scale something up. So my answer is I'm immediately alert to the issues and challenges, but don't let them stop you for a second in building such a league, and encouraging by example everyone to get the hang of it, because it certainly is more fun if you do it ethically. I've not tried the other way, but I think it must be fraught with worry about being found out or, caused grief by regulator or law enforcement or customers or anything. So yeah, I'm on board, Andy.
Tom, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Even just your words of encouragement really do mean something to me. I joined this industry on the 18th of August 1986. So I was there in the Wild West, and a lot of it's been pretty much the Wild West ever since. I can count on I can count on probably one or just two hands the number of people who consistently throughout the years have had a reputation for doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. And you, Tom, are right at the very, very apex of that triangle, of that pyramid. It's been a pleasure and a privilege for me. I know Debbie's enjoyed this conversation as well. We'll get in contact about the idea we've got for the International League of Ethical Leaders in Financial Services. Perhaps you'd be able to help us blueprint it. You are absolutely right. There will be all sorts of challenges, and it may well be that we're only able to do it a little bit, or we're only able to do it okay, but not very well. But at least by starting something, we might just build a bit of momentum that others bigger and better than us can pick up on. Tom, thank you so much indeed. And Debbie, of course, thank you so much to you as well. Thanks, folks. Thank you.
Thank you both very much.